Hello, and welcome to today's panel, Going from Zero to 100% Zero-Emission Transit Fleet Planning by 2025. The disruptions from within, the solution building across Canadian transit. I would like to thank Ballard Power Systems for sponsoring today's panel. My name is Erin Cook. I am the project manager for bus electrification at the City of Winnipeg, Winnipeg Transit, and I will be your moderator for today's session. I am happy today to be joined by three of transit agency experts, Kelly Plesniak, Chris Hill, and Claude Jacobs, who will share and discuss policy considerations, technology challenges, and solution building initiatives driving the transition to zero emission across Canada. Each panelist will be presenting a brief overview of their organization and discussing their zero emission efforts across Canada. We will then get together for a roundtable discussion and Q&A session following their presentations. I encourage the audience to submit any questions to the panelists in the chat, and hopefully we will be able to get to them all. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy today's panel. First up, I'd like to invite Kelly Plesniak to introduce herself and present London Transit. Welcome, Kelly.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Kelly Plesniak. I'm the General Manager of the London Transit Commission. Just to provide a little bit of context with respect to our system, we operate both conventional and specialized services. Pre-pandemic, we provided approximately 25 million rides on our conventional service with a fleet of 220 conventional buses. Our specialized service is contracted out. Our conventional service operates out of 2 bus storage and maintenance facilities. We also have a planned launch of 2 dedicated BRT corridors beginning in 2022-23. In terms of where we've been and where we are to date along this continuum of transitioning our fleet, back in 2019, we were certainly monitoring the progress that some of our industry partners were making toward piloting zero-emission bus technology. But at that time, we didn't really have a City of London climate action plan in place, and there was no identified capital plan or budget relating to zero-emission bus technology here at London Transit. However, early in 2020, at a State of the City address, the Mayor announced his plan to move the London Transit fleet to zero emission, in his words, as quickly as possible. So that certainly turned up the heat, should we say, here at London Transit with respect to beginning to look at that transition. So the first step that we took was to engage QTRIC to undertake a detailed route analysis to give us some kind of, an idea of what the landscape we were dealing with and what was going to make sense, what was going to be doable in the near term, and what we maybe needed to look at for a longer term with respect to beginning that transition. Obviously, throughout 2020, we continue to monitor, the progress that industry partners were making with respect to this, as well as the availability of any provincial and federal government funding that may be available to help us move along this continuum. At the end of 2020, we did present that detailed route analysis to our board and council. And what that resulted in was essentially the next steps, which was then to re-engage QTRIC to undertake a full ZEB implementation plan. We did ask them to complete that plan in 2 parts, with the first part being what we'll call our initial steps into zero emissions. So we're looking at, with that first step, we were thinking, in the range of 8 to 10 buses and around 7 chargers with a mix of both depot and opportunity chargers. So QTRIC worked away throughout 2021 on that plan. And again, we obviously continue to monitor things going on in the industry. The other thing that we began discussions in 2021 was the potential participation in a joint procurement, working with QTRIC and looking at a turnkey solution. We were able to also receive council approval for that initial purchase, so that initial step into our transitions. So again, things were moving fairly rapidly in 2021. In terms of 2022, we are just in the finishing stages of the QTRIC report, our implementation plan. We hope to present that to our board in April, which will be followed by a presentation to council in May. That will give us what we need to then obviously complete our applications for federal funding to begin to move forward. And again, we are still working with QTRIC on the potential for a joint procurement for that initial phase. The other piece that we're looking at in 2022 is to begin to assemble a local team to lead this project. One of the lessons certainly that we've heard from industry partners that are a little further along the continuum than we are is this is a significant undertaking, and it requires dedicated resources in order to make sure that it's done right. In terms of 2023 and forward, again, we're looking at some kind of whether it's through the joint procurement, regardless of whether it is, we're looking at issuing a request for proposal and then moving forward with a contract award and beginning our implementation. So that's, well, I say from my perspective, certainly this feels like it's moving quickly. Obviously, not everybody thinks that way. There's many that think we should already have electric buses operating on the road based on that 2020 announcement. In terms of some of the challenges that we faced throughout this, and that I think we'll continue to face, is again, I just spoke about that, the lack of internal resources dedicated to this initiative. So we need to build that. And unfortunately, with the rate of the change that we're seeing in this technology and the limited amount of people that have the expertise, I think we're all going to struggle to find people that are knowledgeable in this world that can help us lead this. So this is something that I think we're all going to struggle with going forward. I think another big challenge is a lack of understanding of the project complexities by all of our stakeholders. I've had many conversations with stakeholders thinking that transitioning our fleet is really no different than going out and buying an electric car. I have to make some adjustments to my hydro in my garage and I can plug it in and we're good to go. So that a lot of the discussion revolves around that. Again, there's a desire to move quickly versus strategically by political stakeholders. This is obviously any initiatives that are looking to green communities are things that are viewed as a win by political stakeholders at all levels, but certainly local political stakeholders, and specifically here in London, now that we've got a climate action plan, there's certainly a desire to move quickly on some of these initiatives. Obviously, the pandemic has played a role over the last couple of years too, just in terms of resource availability and being able to keep things on track. And then I would say the last challenge is we've still got some uncertainties around funding, noting that the federal program is there, which is great, but it's going to cover only 50% of the cost of the project. And, as a municipality, we've got to find that other 50% if we want to move forward. I think there's also opportunities that we have as an industry. We can certainly continue to work with our partners and learn from experience and best practices. Obviously, we've got this forum that's going on the next couple of days through QTRIC. The Ontario Public Transit Association has got what started out as a zero-emission bus committee and has turned into 6 subcommittees that are all meeting on a regular basis, keeping one another in the loop, sharing best practices, that type of thing. And then there's certainly also information available from our OEMs. So I think we need to all continue to share and work together as we move forward. I think there is that opportunity to look to industry leaders that are further along the continuum than we are. Transit, one thing I've always loved about transit is that we're We're really not in competition with one another, and everybody's willing to share. You're going to hear more about that today. Obviously, we're all sharing where we're at and what we've learned, and I think we need to continue to do that. I think, again, I touched on this earlier, but building your team internally as you're able, we're going to need to focus on that, make sure and rely on our industry partners to share what knowledge they have in terms of training, practices, procedures, et cetera, just to get that team up and running. And then take advantage of joint procurement opportunities. I mentioned earlier in London, we've been working with Qtric. I know that Metrolinx is working on getting a joint procurement off the ground for buses, and TTC has got one as well that they had offered industry partners to participate in. And I'll just say in closing, final thoughts. From my perspective, with respect to this, slow and steady wins the race. Transitioning an entire fleet to a new, rapidly changing technology is not a small undertaking. And it has to be done while we continue to ensure that our scheduled service is on the road every day. While there certainly will be a desire to move quickly, be the first to get funding approval, the biggest ZEB fleet, things like that, especially by local stakeholders, none of these things will matter if your service fails in the interim. We need to be able to continue to provide a service that our constituents can rely upon while we're undertaking this transition. And again, I'll just repeat that the transit industry is always shared and learned from one another. And I think now more than ever, this is important as we all face the challenges associated with transitioning our fleets, and which will result in a greener environment for all of us going forward. Thank you.
Kelly, great presentation. I really love the collaboration that London Transit is bringing to this industry right now. And it's really great to collaborate with other transit agencies who really understand the complexity. And we're all sort of at different levels, and I appreciate the sharing and collaboration that goes on. Thank you, and we'll discuss your project in a little more details in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, we have Chris Hill from Guelph Transit. I'd like to welcome Chris to present today.
Good morning, and first of all, let me say congratulations to Qtric on the amazing announcement this morning about the funding. We're all very proud of this development, and hopefully this moves bus electrification forward more quickly. So I'm Chris Hill. I'm Program Manager of Fleet Planning with the City of Guelph. For those of you who aren't familiar with Guelph, we're a city of about 140,000 people, and we're located about 100 kilometers west of Toronto. Our skyline is a little bit different. We don't have that many office towers and condominiums, but we have this beautiful church. The principal destination for our transit system is the University of Guelph, which at its peak times has an enrollment of about 50,000 students. To get them all there, we have a fleet of 80 Nova bus vehicles, all 12 meters, and 13 mobility buses. We have one garage to service them. In the last year before COVID, 2019, it traveled about 4 million kilometers per year. And this was the source for about 35% of all greenhouse gas emissions from city operations. We've even toyed with light rail transit. We have about 400 meters of track that's a principal attraction of one of our city parks. So currently, right now, we have 4 Siemens 150 kilowatt chargers with pantograph connections currently being installed in our garage. We also have 4 battery electric 564 kilowatt hour Nova Bus LFSE buses on order for delivery in July. This all follows, our progress really started in 2018, actually, when our council approved a goal for the city of Guelph to achieve 100% of its energy needs through renewable sources by 2050. The city also acknowledged the community target of becoming a net zero community by 2050 as well. We assembled our discovery team about 3 years ago and joined Qtric shortly thereafter and asked Qtric to apply their Route I service to verify the performance of electric buses in Guelph. We did receive funding from ISIP in 2020 We'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later. Put out our RFP for charging equipment in March of 2021 and for the vehicles in June of 2021. And we're looking for delivery of the first vehicles this July. So we started with a pilot scale project. Council was comfortable with the timing and pace of learning slow and easy, as Kelly mentioned in her presentation, that this was the right way to go. We are installing the charging equipment, as I mentioned, at our current transit facility, which has been identified as being too small to accommodate transit's future growth. And there is also no electrical capacity to install charging equipment for our whole fleet at this location. For this reason, we're only installing chargers that support our first electric buses with the installation of 12 pantograph connections. So we do see the benefits of electrification as shown in this slide here. It's helping us reach our climate targets, achieving fiscal sustainability and doing the right thing. But because of the long timeline, at least 5 years to reach our goal of 65 electric buses and 10 years for a fully electric fleet, some of these benefits are over the horizon for our politicians and for many of ourselves. The long game isn't on everyone's radar. We've always wanted better technology in things like salt management and waste collection, and we do feel that eliminating fossil fuel is the right way to go. We have mitigated the major risks at this point. We take some comfort knowing that we're not the first. There's at least 10 other transit agencies who've moved before we did, and we've learned some of their lessons. The timing has been good for us. It ties into our net zero goal, our transportation master plan, and our future ready strategic plan. The biggest risk for us is funding, not just for buses, but for our inadequate bus depot on the edge of the city. We did look into all sorts of funding alternatives. We did reject this one as really not being a very good idea. In January of 2020, our first big break came in that we got a funding announcement award from both the federal government and the province of Ontario of $73 million for the purchase of buses and for building a new electric-ready transit facility. The e-bus project was always in jeopardy of losing out to new hospitals and community centers and libraries. Taxpayers want these, but they don't really care a whole lot about bus barns. It's not unusual to change these priorities when other levels of government offer to help pay for it. Council paid attention to this, and so did our executive team, which suggested we use it or lose it. The timing was fortunate that we had identified the benefits and risks. We now had money, and on top of this, there was a market-ready solution from at least 4 bus manufacturers and several charging equipment suppliers. Winter's going to be one challenge, but it's already a challenge. City vehicles hate it. Our first responders hate it. The opportunity for us right now as well with electric charging is going to be another challenge here. We did investigate options for a heat pump or an all-electric heating system, but we didn't believe the technology was ready and proven in similar climates, and so we opted for a diesel heater. We are optimistic that in the coming years for our future orders that we will have 100% electric buses. As we move forward with the design for our transit fleet, we know that short and long-term power outages are a part of a scenario and strategic planning. We also know that other alternative fuels like CNG and hybrids and hydrogen also had and have had growing pains. These are just some of the challenges we'll find solutions for. People do ask, for example, what will we do if the power runs out? So probably the same thing we would do in any situation like this. We're going to go back to our business continuity plans and put them in gear. Our first order of electric buses is only 4. And if the power goes out, these 4 will just not charge. As our fleet expands until our new facility is built, electric buses will not be able to respond if there's a power outage, and service may be affected if we do not have a diesel bus to take over. We have done this before. We did electric rail transit for 50 years in an era when there was no internet, no cellular phones, no GPS, and apparently no safety regulations either. Our community wants us to do this. We are moving forward now and putting into action the promises that we've made to reduce emissions in our city, and we're delivering for the citizens of Guelph. Going forward, of course, we're excited to be looking forward to a receipt of our first buses, 4 buses in July as such. We didn't know that COVID was going to hit us as hard or for as long as it did. and we'll have to see if ridership returns to the levels that we expect it to. The other thing that we're very pleased about with our initiative in Guelph is that this really helps move along the progress of electric trucks and medium and heavy duty vehicles. And yesterday's announcement by the federal government of their new climate change action plan is a welcome step in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's really exciting to see how far transit has come in the last couple of years, from a few pilots to really these detailed studies and really understanding how this is a disruption to transit. So it's great to see the in-depth study and research that Guelph Transit is taking towards their transition. So thank you for your presentation today, and we'll talk to you a little bit more detail in a few minutes. Thank you. Next up, we have Claude Jacobs from Société de Transport de l'Outaouais, here to talk about their plans for electrification.
Thank you, Aaron. Good morning, everybody. As you can see, and here soon, this is going to be in French, but I will be able to field some questions in English at the end if you have any. And so just a general overview of our project here. It's a little bit of a different world in Quebec, as the driving from this project comes from the province itself, and so it is a political target that we have by 2025 to have 55% at least of our fleet to be electrified. So financing won't be the same challenge here as it might be in other part of the Canada because of that, and so we also have a whole new management on board at STO. And so from that, we have chosen to use this project to also transform STO to a more modernized way to operate and maintain and do everything we do. And so it's going to be a much more important project than just to electrify the bus fleet, which is already quite a challenge in itself, as we all know. And so that's the general context of my presentation, which is quite heavy for the time we have this morning. So I'll fly over a few of those slides. So if you have questions at the end, and like I said, I'll be happy to answer them. So like I said, this is a part of the green policy from the province of Quebec with the 55% bus fleet to be electrified by 2030. Also, of course, an opportunity to save on the energy costs, but also to transform the way we operate from a technological standpoint. So some of the parameters of our project, of course, is the change in the vehicles, the way we operate and maintain them, but also for us the realization that we have also what we call a fifth season, which is the root of winter, which is quite a challenge from heating and cost energy standpoint. So like everybody else, we did in 2019 studies to look at our ability to make sure that we can still operate reliably our systems. Just like to piggyback on Kelly comments, at the end of the day, ZEB is nice and cost saving on energy is nice, but we still need to provide good and reliable service to our customers. And so we looked at everything to make sure that the network was able to operate with the autonomy of the battery we would have, and so look at the number of stops, distance, the slopes, and the maximal speed of the vehicles on the network, and so forth and so on. And so that came to that total energy required to operate those buses in the fifth season. So you have an idea of what it means. So if you look at the sets of bars at the extreme right, you see there the average per winter maximum, which is the fifth season for us. And you see the gap in consumption between the 2.88 in winter and those coldest day of the winter where the maximum peak of consumption goes all the way up to 390. And that's why we would have, for a time being at least, the need to keep heating system with diesel system on board or super fully electric vehicle. So that's an opportunity for the future, of course. So all the parameters we look at the beginning there, just like everybody else, you know, you look at the traction effort, the consumption for heating and air conditioning, and all the other little systems on board to make sure that you would be able to look at the all the possibility to maximize the autonomy of the vehicle in the future. So that's how we were able to confirm that our systems can work with those batteries. Of course, so that's the morning and afternoon peak. That's going to translate itself into change in operations to make sure that every bus that comes back to the depot between morning and afternoons will have to go to a charging station. So we will be able to make the afternoon shift. But also it translates itself in an opportunity in the early evenings to night shift to smooth the charging of all the fleet. So we don't, you know, plug all the buses during the same 5 hours of the night, but use the full 8 or 10 hour shift we have between 20 hour and 5 in the morning to spread out a little bit some of that peak consumption. Just to give you an idea of the impact, everything we need to provide with the bus from the batteries. So you see the dotted line there is basically the real autonomy we got from the batteries. The light blue line, a vertical line, is where we need to be back at the depot, otherwise we just ran out. And so you see the red line, which is the winter maximum situations. And that's really the one that goes quite early above the dotted lines. And so we see from the blue line that about 80% of our bus in the winter maximum condition would not be able actually to come back to the depot. And so that's going to be design change in our network operations for those buses to operate on a shorter circuit in the future before we're able to make it through the other winter conditions. So that's a little bit saying how it will impact, you know, our bus fleet. So we will have to increase basically around 5% more buses in our fleet in generals, and that's an increase of up to 50% more buses during weekends schedules. So that's major in terms of the number of buses we need to have and maintain, the number of drivers we need to have and train, and so forth and so on. So that's major when we look at the operation of it. So in terms of smoothing the peak of the power we need, it has a major impact. As you can see at the top there, the highest peak in green is if we just charge the bus whenever they come back to the depot. It creates quite a high peak, and that's translated itself into quite the bill at the end of the month. And so if we could come up with a more intelligent system to optimize the way and the time we can recharge the bus, then you see how we were able to flatten those peaks and use a lower peaks and lower costs. There's also an opportunity on the cost side of it where in Quebec here with Hydro-Quebec, we have different rates of contract we could have with the Hydro-Quebec depending on the consumption. And so the higher the consumption on the extreme left, then the lower rate you see LG rate here. And so from that information, we start looking into how many more systems from the building standpoint, from the maintenance standpoint, could we also electrify to maximize the number of kilowatt we're using in a month to lower even more our dollar per kilowatt we would have to pay to, at the end of the day, generate additional savings. So just a few words saying about the total consumption of the first depot we're going to do. That project needs to be completed by the end of 2025. It was scheduled to go up to 12 megawatt of power required. From everything I just said, now we're looking at a project that is going to be a little bit more between 15 and 17 megawatts, just to capture the reality of where the batteries are and the addition of more system into the project. The scenario to put pantograph or combo cables to hook to the bus was looked at, and from a health and safety standpoint, as well as a more easily maintainable systems, we have decided from all our depot parking area, we're going to go with the pantograph options and keep the combo cable for our maintenance area. So we will be able to move the buses on a maintenance bay up and downs and still have the bus to stay connected to the charger. Prove that things change in times. That was our schedule for replacing or receiving more additional electric buses. So all the red numbers you see in the graph. So you see starting in 2026 and then forever, we were looking to receive 14 total electric buses in our fleet. Since last week, that number has already changed to 44. And so we're going to go way up ahead of the curve here. And we are under reviewing whatever it means for the infrastructures to be able to recharge that number of buses much more earlier than we were anticipating. So a few recommendations from the technical standpoint, the use of pantograph, the use of 600-volt equipment, just to make sure that we don't reinvent the wheels where we don't have to. Work with the industry to develop an intelligent systems to recharge the bus that takes into account operation, maintenance, and everything else we'd like to optimize. And of course, review the setup of all the maintenance bay with this high tension new type of equipment and components to maintain as well. Quick glance at the update on the project. And so our target is to have a lane of 10 buses to be fully electrified by the end of 2023. We should have at that point 9 buses in service, fully electric. And then, like I said, starting in 2026, we will look to have about 30 to 40 vehicles per year. And God knows how that number is going to change. A quick note on the far right column you see here called change, a culture of change. And so we've been looking at that since the day one. Like I said in the beginning, it's going to be for us a transition project, much more than infrastructure projects. And so we're looking at everything we do and how we are going to be able to use that opportunity to change the culture of maintenance and operation, the way we've been doing things since, forever, and use electrification to modernize the way we do things and think. And so the way we bring all our management teams and employees on board of this and the union, it's going to be part of our project to make sure that we're on board at the end with what we do. The opportunity to have online recharge stations will also, connect with our first point. And like Kelly said, at the end of the day, make sure that the systems is ready to go every morning. If we could have, online station like that here and there to help us reduce the pressure we have to recharge the fleet at the depot only at night with a limited amount of time, might be a good way to justify those extra investment in the future. So we're looking into that. And that's the different stations we have across the city where we could have extra pantograph to recharge those buses during the daytime. So some of the preoccupations we have, of course, maturity, reliability of the charging system, the bus, everything's new. So there will be a learning curve and a lack of reliability of our network when we get there. So we need to talk about it and make sure that we have plans to address that. The way we need to bring our people with the new culture of health and safety, maintenance and operation, and how we could also look at our other depot we have to be electrified with the arrival also of a light rail system in Gatineau around the 2028, 2030 period. So a lot of organizational impact on people, the way we do stuff, like I said, some of the risk finally about the industry being able to follow up with the availability of those vehicles and charging equipment. few glimpses of information about the costs and interest from fuel to electricity. And a big merci to everyone. There you go.
Thank you very much. It sounds like you have a lot of the pros and cons of being in a cold environment, much like we do. It'll be interesting to see how the industry goes, with most of the development being in California and now starting to get a significant number of buses in Canada. So looking forward to sharing information with you in the future.
Indeed.
So thank you very much for your presentation. We can ask Kelly and Chris to come back on live. We'll start with a few questions here. So one of the themes I kept hearing over and over again is excitement and nervousness about the transition to zero emission. Kelly, you talked specifically about transit wanting to proceed strategically while there's political pressure to move quickly. Tell me a little bit about some of the things you're doing to help convince stakeholders that London Transit's strategic approach is needed.
I think one of the key pieces that I talk about is we back in the early 90s here at London Transit had significant political pressure and jumped in very quickly to the first generation low floor combination natural gas buses, resulting within a 3-year period, we had a third of our fleet that was made up of that brand new technology. That didn't go well for any number of reasons. Again, it was new. We were the first to learn. We didn't necessarily have the resources to be able to respond to all of those challenges. Notwithstanding that, like I said, there was that political pressure, and we moved quickly. That resulted in the following 6 years of us essentially not making service every single day because of the number of buses that we had down. So that history is certainly still here. People remember that. And, we certainly try to use that as a learning moment for everyone. That's not the way to do things. And yes, there may be funding and yes, there's the desire to move quickly, but if you move too quickly, you put us in a situation where it's going to be impossible for us, potentially to make service. So certainly remind them of that. And then again, point to what we're seeing across the industry. I mean, we've talked today, and Aaron, you certainly mentioned it, the number of systems that, are further along than we are here in London, but they're all learning, and they're all learning that everything that we've all just said, it's not that simple. And there are going to be issues, there's going to be compatibility issues. There's going to be charging issues. There's going to be performance issues. The buses may not perform the way we anticipate. So, we need the time to learn about those things and make sure that those are built into our plans going forward so that we can continue to have, like I said earlier, that reliable bus service. If we turn all of our customers off during this transition, that's not going to be where we want to be at the end of the day. I think you're on mute, Aaron.
I muted myself instead of unmuting. So many challenges that we have today are not bus related, and learning from where everybody else is and what steps can help sort of troubleshoot that. Claude, you sort of mentioned the push for acceleration as well, where you were planning a certain number, 20 or so buses, and now that's jumped to the 40s. How are you sort of regrouping to deal with that, and being able to reiterate the development of the plan that you've done now versus being forced to accelerate it?
Well, I guess on two fronts there, we designed from the get-go the projects to electrify the depot to be complete, meaning we're not going to electrify only part of the depot, we're going to do it all. So we will be ready for the next 25 years in terms of infrastructures in place, being all the pantograph installed or the charger, all the new 25 KV systems and all that. And all we need is working with Hydro-Quebec on a 2-year increment to increase the new power that's going to be available, not to go too far and pay penalties on stuff you don't need, but also make sure that you always have a few megawatts ahead of the curve, so you're ready from whatever political new decision comes around, and you can adjust yourself on the fly if the vehicles already. And like we said, I mean, we take for granted that it's just a questions of, subsidies and decision making from our organization standpoint, but the whole industry needs to catch up to the technology. Nobody is able to provide 100 bus per day tomorrow morning, regardless if you're available and ready to pay for it. So that's a learning curve in availability. It's also a learning curve in reliability on those vehicles, that have never been deployed on a large scale. And nobody's talking about the same effect on the infrastructure and the charging system. Nobody has even produced a number of chargers and equipment we're going to use. So what's going to be the learning curve on that, and also how those things are all going to interface themselves with future software to operate the operation, take into account the maintenance process and then this new charging idea. So none of those things exist today. And we are expected to deliver a reliable system that's going to integrate all of those things and still be as reliable as we were 10 years ago. And so
it's really interesting how much electrification touches on every aspect of transit. I was hired here to put a few buses on the road, and now we're looking at how to reorganize our operations, how to reorganize our service, and much like you, like Chris and Claude, and I'm not sure about Kelly, but power limitations. So Chris, one of the things you ran into is you're looking at a new garage to help support your electrification plans. That obviously probably wasn't a cost that you considered when you first started looking at putting some electric buses on the road. How has been the support with Guelph in terms of getting a new building for a transit agency aligned with your electrification plans, or was this something that was in development before?
Actually, the timing was good because we were just getting all of our facts and needs assessments together to demonstrate that we were outgrowing the existing transit facility, as were several other departments within Guelph, like Public Works, for example. The Public Works group has a separate garage as well that's more than 60 years old and has been outgrown as well. So the need for a new operations campus was advanced by the fact that we were getting some federal and provincial government funding to help us out for the electric bus part of this. It's going to be the biggest capital project that Guelph has ever tackled. To build this new operations campus. It's going to take probably 5 to 10 years before it's fully built out. But it will be a state-of-the-art fleet maintenance facility as well as an electrified bus facility. And this has had council's backing as we've moved forward. This is along with our executive team as well.
You've also mentioned, Chris, about GHG targets for your city, and you've made a commitment to zero-emission buses, but this obviously doesn't happen overnight, and you're talking about opening a new garage, then only putting in 20 pantographs in a facility that's designed for 70.
Right.
What is the future of your traditional diesel fleet as you're transitioning your operations to support the rollout of new technology?
Right. Well, diesel will be our backup plan because again, we don't know how the electric buses are really going to work once we get them. We've done lots of work and analysis. Cutrick's done a verification of the performance claims of the bus manufacturers to determine what's going to work well. We've ordered the largest battery size that was available to us so that we could avoid having to use opportunity charging in at least the first go with electric buses. So all of our vehicles will be charged from the depot as opposed to having en route charging in place anywhere else. But it's kind of like cell phones and the evolution of cell phones, right? The first generation is going to be the starting point. The second generation is going to be better. The third generation is going to be even better than that. We remember the first cell phones when they came out, they could only do one thing, and that was make phone calls. Now we look at what cell phones can do for us, and it's an entirely different story in terms of what this product has become. So as electric buses evolve and our confidence grows in terms of our ability to work with the technology and to handle the unique requirements of electric buses, I think we'll then eventually say to ourselves, we're probably ready to eliminate diesel from the fleet at some point, but we're a few years away from that yet.
It's interesting to talk about cell phones and their evolution. I think the electric buses are bringing a new evolution in terms of technology and data for transit. Claude, what would you say, is there any additional benefits from introducing new technology into transit that's helping, reshape some of your operations?
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful opportunity to, talking with our people in terms of the need to, being more efficient in everything we do. It's so obvious that electric buses are changing the game, that it's easier to start a conversation with the union and our, employees in general, than the need to look at different way to do the business. And, I think from like I said, schedule maintaining and the way we train our people, the way we work with people, the way we're able to, outsource work and do everything really. I mean, like you said, I mean, it's just across the board a total change of the way we were looking at stuff. I think one of the benefit is also our ability in the future to attract the new generation with a cleaner, more cool and technological advance tool like an electrical bus. I think it's really cool for the new generations to look at that ability. And it solved one of the challenge we have as agencies to attract people like maintenance and operators, bus drivers, and so forth and so on. This new things could be a really cool way to package our image as an industry to attract a new crowd of potential workers for us in the future.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see transit being seen as a cool new technology now. It always surprises me the number of people that go and shoot YouTube videos driving on the latest zero-emission bus across, North America. So seeing that level of excitement in transit is good to see. Kelly, how about you? How do you see data from electric buses impacting, your service development?
Again, I think Aaron, you touched on it. So did Claude. I mean, we're talking about organizational change. It's not just, just buying the latest and greatest bus. Like we've kind of all been in that mindset for so long. It's going to impact every area of the organization. I think we're going to see, much more reliance from an IT perspective in terms of just keeping the buses on the road. Right now, a diesel bus pretty much, as long as it's got fuel and the appropriate fluids, it's going to operate. There's not that heavy reliance, from an IT side. So I think and that's a very good point that Claude just made with respect to making transit cool. I mean, it is going to be, I envision also more attractive for that younger crowd. The fear that I have though is that the skill sets won't be there. I mean, I think the educational programs have to catch up with this demand. And I think at least initially in the first few years, we're going to find ourselves in strong competition with one another for those resources. And I'll just go back to, that's why I think it's so important that as an industry, we continue to share best practices and, resources, protocols, that type of thing, because I think that is going to be a challenge for all of us, attracting that talent, but even finding that talent, to be able to fill those gaps as we move forward.
Are any of you actively working with local community colleges to develop programs to support your rollout?
Yeah, we are. There is an association in Quebec for all of the agencies, that allowed us to kind of regroup the volume of new employees we would need as an industry, and that's helping us, to convince some of those colleges and university to develop programs and justify the investments for them to develop those programs, to know that there will be a crowd, not only 10 or 20 people for STO, but hundreds of them required across the agencies in Quebec. And so it's going to take some time for them to develop all the knowledge and the training program, but we're working with them already. We're working with the industry from a supplier standpoint to make sure that they do have some of those technical advanced skill set, like technicians and electricians and all that, and that they're already looking at training those people, especially for a new environment hours. And so in case we need to give contract away to lease personal type thing, that there would be a backup plan from that side as well. And so like I said about a culture of change, it's also about the way we manage and plan our business, and we need to think outside of the box. We won't be able, even if we want to and have the money to do so, to just hire all the people we need with all the skill sets and the number of people we need to do everything in the future. We need to work with all the resources from the industry and see how we could, all of those things together to make sure that at the end of the day we have the tools to operate reliably.
Shifting focus a little bit here, I think all of you have focused on long-range buses. They've kind of taken over the industry right now, but it seems like you're all using strategic positioning of en route charging. Is that part of a way to potentially eliminate the use of diesel auxiliary heaters in the future? Are you using that strategically at this point? Let's start with Chris.
I don't know yet. I think the fact is that the diesel heaters have been proven by other transit agencies to increase the range in wintertime by almost 50% on buses. So there aren't enough real world examples yet of using en route charging in place of diesel auxiliary heaters to be able to allow us to draw any conclusions.
How about you, Kelly?
Sorry, I would echo Chris's comments. I don't think there's enough data out there to say that would be the driving force. With respect to London specifically, a number of our routes were just long enough that there was no way to be able to transition without that opportunity charge, unless we were going to buy 2 buses to replace every diesel so that they had that opportunity to return to the depot midday for recharge, which doesn't make sense either. So it was more, from our perspective, it was more strategic around trying to electrify specific routes.
Mm-hmm. And I think, and Claude, you mentioned too, and it's the same here, and I'm sure most places, our Saturday runs tend to be much longer. Saturday, Sundays are longer and are out longer. So, this heater problem becomes more of an issue on those runs even. What are you doing with your location of en route charging? Is that part of your primary charging right now, or strategic locations?
It is, but much to Chris' comments, I would say, the big unknown here is the real autonomy we're going to get from the batteries. And so we don't know really for sure, what do we start with? The Nova bus, for example, is advertising a 564 kilowatt of available energy on your bus. We know it's not going to be what we have to work with. It's going to be minus 20% for the system, and then a top 5% that protect the batteries for overcharging. And so you really start with 75 to 80% of real autonomy on the buses and on the batteries. And so once we stabilize that numbers per se in a few years and see, maybe it's 85, maybe it's 75, then we could start looking at, how much more energy we really have available to start looking at other things. And as we get better with the systems and the mindset and the culture of maintenance and operation, maybe, smoothing those peaks of consumption, the way we can recharge, the timing we could recharge the bus, both in the depot and online, all of those things together might create enough availability of energy to replace the heater system. But I don't think that's anywhere near in the future.
Thank you. Well, we're almost out of time for today. One last question here before I get everyone to do a quick 30-second wrap up. About batteries. So everybody's talking about the end of life of batteries right now. So Chris, you're probably the furthest along here. We actually have an active procurement out right now. What are you doing in terms of end of life? Is that part of the OEM's responsibility, or is that a transit agency responsibility right now, in your opinion?
We'll see it as a transit agency responsibility, but our understanding is that the batteries, and this has been demonstrated by electric cars and other vehicles in place for the last 20 years, they're fully recyclable.
Perfect. All right, so we're getting at the end of the session here. So quick 30 seconds. If everyone you want to have someone to take away from today's session, what would you say the key takeaway you would want to present to people today is, Kelly?
I would say, I'll just reiterate again, take the opportunity to participate in, certainly the CUTRA conferences, the task forces, the various committees that either the province or CUTA has to learn from one another and continue to work together. This is too disruptive of a project for us not to all be rowing in the same direction and working together at every opportunity.
Great takeaway. And Claude, yours, 30 seconds or less.
Much to that same comments, I guess, if it's not already the case, that project needs to be elevated to the executive teams of every transit agencies, because as we've been talking today, there's just too much influence on everything we do in our for a construction or a project management team to be driving that process alone. I mean, it does affect and should affect everything we do to modernize and make us a cool industry. And so it needs to come from the top and being followed and supported by the top and everybody else.
100% agree. And Chris?
Well, this is the right thing to do and the right time to be doing it as well. Our communities have been asking for progress in terms of reducing emissions for a long time. This is a great opportunity for us to use one of the high nails in our operations here and reduce emissions from that sector. If done right, if the steps are taken in the proper order, this shouldn't be an overly costly exercise. There's great resources like QTRIC to help out. And of course, collaboration with our colleagues at other transit agencies is just invaluable.
Thank you very much. Time just flew today. It was great having the opportunity to talk with you, and look forward to speaking with you more in the future. And I hope the audience today enjoyed the session and enjoys the remainder of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.